The morning the Earl of Ashvale returned to Thornfield Park, the iron gate bore a different name. It was cast in fresh black letters above the arch, the paint still sharp against the October air, and Miss Cecily Vane read it from the opposite side of the drive, without meaning to. She had come out early to walk the kitchen garden before the household stirred, a habit formed in 3 months as companion to old Mrs. Hartwell, and she had not expected to meet anyone on the gravel path at 7:30. She had not expected a man on horseback who had stopped at his own gate and was staring at another man's name where his should have been. He sat very still. That was the first thing she noticed. The horse shifted beneath him, one hoof scraping the frost-stiffened gravel, but the rider did not move. He wore a dark riding coat, travel-worn, his hat pulled low against the cold, and something about the line of his jaw in the gray morning light made Cecily's chest tighten in a way she could not have explained. He was perhaps 35, though the stillness in him read older, the stillness of a man looking at a grave he had been told to expect, and found he was not prepared for after all. Cecily should have gone inside. She knew that. She was a companion, the youngest daughter of a clergyman dead 2 years past, a woman whose opinion on any matter not pertaining to Mrs. Hartwell's shawl or correspondence was neither requested nor welcome. She should have turned quietly and gone back to the kitchen door, and she would have, except that the man's horse chose that moment to step sideways toward the iron post, and in steadying it, his hat came off entirely. And for one unguarded second, she saw his face. She saw the recognition in it, not of her, for they had never met, The recognition was of the house itself, visible beyond the gate, its familiar stone facade under a sky the color of iron. His face did not crumple or collapse. It simply went very quiet, the way a room goes quiet after a door closes on something that cannot be said. And then his eyes moved to her. "The gate is locked," Cecily said, because someone had to say something, and because it was true. He looked at her. His eyes were a dark gray, the color of deep water, and they held the kind of restraint that costs something. "I am aware," he said. His voice was level and unhurried. "I had the key before I left." She ought to have left it there. But something in the perfect steadiness of his voice, the flatness of it, the refusal to perform indifference when he was not indifferent at all, held her. "Whom shall I tell them is at the gate?" she asked. A pause. Long enough to feel the cold settle around them both. "Tell them," he said, "that Elliot Ashford has come home." She had heard the name. Every person connected to Thornfield Park had heard it in the past year, always in the same careful, lowered voice. The 3rd Earl of Ashvale, who had gone to the continent on a private matter 3 years prior and had not returned, whose creditors had exhausted the patience of the courts, whose estate had been legally transferred last April to a Mr. Gerald Pemberton of London, who had bought the whole of it for less than it was worth, and who had since taken himself back to London and left the house in the care of Mrs. Hartwell, his elderly widowed aunt. The man who had, according to Mrs. Hartwell's own careful accounting, lost everything. Cecily went inside and told them. She did not consider whether she ought to. She simply went. If you had known Thornfield Park only in its current life, you might find it difficult to imagine it as it was when he was a boy here. His grandmother had told him the history of every room. She had died when he was 12, and he could still walk from memory through the long gallery, naming the portraits in order. His grandfather third from the left, with the peculiar aquiline nose. He had carried that gallery across France and Italy, and a rainy autumn in Brussels, and had returned 7 months ago, when the matter was at last resolved. He had not anticipated that the resolution had come too late. The debt had begun with his father, as most things in his life had begun with his father. The late Earl had been a man of considerable charm and considerable appetite, and the combination had proved financially ruinous. By the time Elliot inherited, the estate was leveraged against notes he had not known existed. He had gone to the continent at a solicitor's direction, believing a distant relation's property could be recovered in time. It had not been. While he was away, the notes fell due, and Pemberton, who had been one of the note holders all along, acquired Thornfield Park for £9,000 in April. The estate had been valued at 4 times that. Elliot knew all of this. He had pieced it together from solicitors' letters and a single frank conversation with a friend in London, and he had arrived at a clear picture of his situation. He was 36 years old. He had the title, which no one could take, and a small sum salvaged from the continental business, which was enough to live on quietly, but not enough to buy back £9,000 of prime Hertfordshire property. He had come to Thornfield Park because he needed to understand, concretely, what was left. He had not come with illusions. He had not accounted for the locked gate, nor for the name above it, nor for the young woman who had stood on the other side of the gravel drive and looked at him with eyes that had seen his face at its most unguarded and had not looked away. Mrs. Hartwell received him in the morning room. She was a small, careful woman of 70, the kind of woman who had spent so long managing other people's difficulties that she had developed an expression of permanent mild apology. She offered him tea. He declined. She offered to send for the housekeeper. He said it was not necessary. They sat in chairs that had belonged to his grandmother and looked at one another across the distance of what neither of them could easily name. "My nephew purchased the property legally," she said at last. "I should not wish you to think otherwise." "I am certain he did," Elliot said. "He has been very good to the staff. He kept them all on." She paused. "Including the groundskeeper, who has been here since your father's time, as you know." He did know. He had seen Hargreaves crossing the stable yard this morning, older and slower, but still moving with the particular deliberate pace of a man who has decided that the work is the same, regardless of who owns it. "I have no quarrel with Mr. Pemberton," Elliot said. And it was true. He had quarreled, in the privacy of his own thinking, with his father, and with the solicitor who had given him false hope, and with the court speed in a situation that had deserved rather more time. He had not quarreled with Pemberton, who had done precisely what any man of business would do when presented with a legal opportunity to acquire a good estate cheaply. "Then may I ask," Mrs. Hartwell said with some care, "what it is you wish to do here?" It was a reasonable question. He had been asking it of himself since the ship had docked at Harwich. "I wish to review the contents inventory," he said. "Several items in this house belonged to my mother's family and were not properly part of the estate. I should like to know whether they are still present, and if so, to raise the matter formally with Mr. Pemberton's solicitor." Mrs. Hartwell's expression changed very slightly. She had not anticipated this. She had perhaps anticipated grief or anger, and was prepared for those. She was not prepared for the specific, careful, legal nature of what he was proposing. "I see," she said. "I can arrange access to the inventory." "Thank you." A silence. "Miss Vane," she said, as if arriving at it slowly, "my companion has been cataloging the library. She has considerable knowledge of the contents of the house. If you wished, she might show you the inventory records." Something shifted in the room. He was not certain what. "That would be convenient," he said. Cecily had spent the hour since her errand at the gate attempting to place Lord Ashvale in the correct category of her experience, and finding that he refused to stay there. Gentlemen, in her experience, fell into recognizable types. the bereaved who wanted to be managed, the proud who wanted to be flattered, the difficult who wanted to win. She had not met the kind whose restraint was not performance but fact, and who looked at a locked gate bearing another man's name with the specific quietness of a person deciding what to do next. She was a clergyman's daughter. She knew the difference between a man at peace and a man who had chosen not to show what peace had cost him. She brought the inventory ledgers to the library at 11 o'clock, as Mrs. Hartwell had directed. He was already there. He was standing at the east wall with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the shelves the way she imagined he had looked at the gate. Not at the books themselves, or not only, or at the arrangement of them. At something he recognized. "My lord," she said from the doorway. He turned. His gaze was direct in a way that did not feel rude, only attentive, as if he was in the habit of seeing what was actually in front of him, rather than what he expected. "Miss Vane," he said. "Come in, please." She set the ledgers on the reading table. He crossed to it and opened the top one without preamble, and they stood side by side in the long morning light. And Cecily was very aware of the small distance between them, the warmth of another person close, the way his sleeve had brushed the edge of the ledger as he turned the first page. She straightened her back and looked at the inventory. "The portrait collection," she said, finding her professional footing. "They are itemized beginning on page 7. "I know where to find it," he said. Then, a beat later, "Forgive me. That was not courteous." She glanced at him. He was looking at the ledger. A line at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "You know this house," she said. "I was born in it." She had known that. She had known it before this morning. In the abstract way one knows a fact that belongs to someone else's history. But standing here, with the autumn light on the shelves, and his hands open over the inventory of his own possessions, it settled differently. "The portrait of the Countess," she said after a moment. "Your mother's mother. It is still here. Third wall, second frame." He looked up. "I noticed it when I was cataloging," she said. "It is marked in the inventory as belonging to the library, but the back board has the Crestwood family seal, which is not an Ashvale seal. I made a note." He looked at her for a moment. A real look, not the polite surface kind, the kind that sees. "You made a note," he said. "Someone should have, before now." That was the moment, she would think later, when something changed. Not in any dramatic sense. No candlelight, no held breath, no declaration. Only a man at a reading table who had come home to a house that no longer bore his name, and a woman who had looked at an inventory and noticed something that mattered to him, and had written it down without being asked. If Mrs. Hartwell noticed that Lord Ashvale remained at Thornfield Park for longer than the review of an inventory ought to require, she did not say so directly. She mentioned, over dinner that first evening, that the east bedroom had been kept in readiness for her nephew's occasional visits, and that it would be no difficulty to extend the same courtesy to Lord Ashvale for a few days. Elliot accepted with the contained courtesy of a man who had not expected to be offered anything, and had prepared no graceful way to receive it. He stayed 4 days, then 6, then 10. The work of the inventory expanded in the way that careful work expands when it turns out to matter more than anticipated. There were 37 items in the house that bore the Crestwood seal, or its near equivalent, and each required careful comparison against the original transfer documents, which arrived from London in a sealed packet on the 3rd day. Cecily worked alongside him each morning, her handwriting neat and precise in the margins of the catalogue she was building, and he worked in the particular focused silence of a man who has found something useful to do with his hands and his mind. She learned, in the way one learns things not said directly, several facts about him. That he had a younger sister now married, whose welfare had been part of his calculation when he left. That the not knowing had been the sharpest part of it. It came in fragments, a name mentioned while they turned pages of the music catalog, a reference made while examining a framed miniature. He spoke as if uncertain anyone was listening. And then sometimes he looked up and found her listening, and the briefest thing crossed his face that she could not name. She was not in the habit of naming things she could not afford to have. She was 24 years old. She had 2 good gowns and a small sum set aside from 2 years of salary that would not last a year without work. She had come to Mrs. Hartwell through a family connection, and the position was comfortable and not unkind, and she was grateful for it with the precise gratitude of a person who feels the weight of a life contracted to the size of other people's requirements. She had read every book in the library she was cataloging. She had opinions about most of them. She was very careful about whom she offered those opinions to. On the 5th day, she had offered one to Lord Ashvale about a collected volume of travel essays, and he had listened with the same quality of attention he brought to the inventory, and then said, without hesitation, that she was right, and the essayist was a bore, and had pulled another volume from the shelf and held it out to her without ceremony, saying it was better. She had taken it and looked at the spine and felt something warm and precarious move through her chest before she could stop it. She was very careful after that. The dismissive note arrived on the 8th day, in a letter from London. Mrs. Hartwell brought it herself, which meant she had read it. She came to the library in the late afternoon, when the autumn light was long and gold on the shelves, and Cecily was at the catalogue table, and Lord Ashvale was at the east wall with the ladder, and Mrs. Hartwell stood in the doorway with an expression Cecily recognized as the one she wore when delivering something she found personally disagreeable. "A letter from my nephew," she said. Lord Ashvale came down from the ladder. He did not take the letter. He looked at Mrs. Hartwell with that patient, attentive quality that Cecily had come to understand was not coldness, but the careful management of something that lay beneath. "He writes to say," Mrs. Hartwell said, and her voice had a particular flatness, "that he considers the review unnecessary, as the transfer documents are complete and final. He also says," a pause, "that any personal effects you wish to claim will be returned on presentation of proof of ownership. He further says you are welcome to remain as a guest for as long as you require, as befits a gentleman of your station." A final pause. He says it in rather fewer words than that, and with less warmth. Lord Ashvale said nothing for a moment. He says, Mrs. Hartwell added, with some reluctance, "that your companion in the survey is to be reminded that her position here is as companion to myself, and not as secretary to visiting gentlemen." Cecily kept her face still. She had practice. "I see," said Lord Ashvale. "I thought you should know," Mrs. Hartwell said. After she had gone, the library was very quiet. The gold light moved slowly across the floor. Lord Ashvale stood at the reading table with both hands flat on the surface, not looking at anything in particular. And Cecily closed the catalogue and set down her pen and waited to see what kind of man he would be in this moment. He straightened. He picked up the catalogue and looked at the page she had been working on. "We have 11 items remaining," he said. "I should like to finish them before the solicitor's reply comes." That was all. She opened the catalogue again and found her place. She had been right about him, she thought. He was not the kind that needed to win. He was the kind that continued. She was also, she was aware, watching him with a quality of attention that had nothing professional in it, and she was going to have to stop. The difficulty was that she did not stop. She noticed too much. She noticed the way he thanked the footman who brought coal to the grate, using the man's name. She noticed that he ate very little at dinner, not from lack of appetite, but from some private abstinence she could not account for. She noticed that when he stood in a room where something of his was still in its original place, a small, still thing crossed his face, there and gone, before he moved on. She noticed that when something amused him and he suppressed it, the amusement stayed in the corner of his eyes a little longer than anywhere else. She noticed his hands. She had no business noticing his hands. On the 10th day, she was in the music room cataloging the sheet music when she found the miniature. It was tucked between 2 bound volumes of sonatas, which was why it had not appeared in any previous inventory. A small oval frame, the kind meant to be kept close, the kind a person carries rather than displays. She opened it, as one must in order to catalog it, and found inside a portrait of a woman perhaps 40 years old, dark-haired, with a face that she recognized in the set of the mouth. She carried it to the library. "My lord," she said from the doorway. He looked up from the transfer documents. She crossed the room and set it on the table in front of him. He was very still for a moment. Then he picked it up and looked at it. And the room became the kind of quiet that has a temperature. "My mother," he said. His voice was level. The thing in his eyes was not. "It was between the sonatas," she said. "It had not been catalogued. I believe it was placed there deliberately, to keep it safe." He held it for a long moment. Then he set it down on the table between them, face up, and looked at it. And Cecily stood at the edge of that moment, knowing she was witnessing something she had not been entitled to, and yet was grateful for in a way she could not explain. His face was open in a manner she had not seen before. Not grief exactly. The aftermath of grief. The still place on the other side of it where something has been accepted, and the acceptance has become its own kind of sorrow. "My sister gave it to her," he said, "years ago. I had forgotten she had it." Cecily said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not have diminished it. "She died while I was in Italy," he said. "I did not receive the letter in time." The weight of it settled in the room. She felt it on her own chest, the particular grief of arriving somewhere too late, of distance doing what it does to the things one intends to protect. "I am sorry," she said. He looked up at her. The look went on long enough to be something other than acknowledgement, long enough for her to be aware of it as a weight, a warmth, a thing she would not be able to catalogue. "I know," he said. That was the evening she let herself understand what she had been doing for 10 days. She had been falling in love with a man who had lost everything, and was conducting himself with the quiet precision of someone who had decided that dignity was the only thing left to him, and intended to keep it. She had been falling in love with his attention, his restraint. The way he said her name, Miss Vane, as if it was a thing worth saying. She had been falling in love without her permission, which was of course how it happened. But she had been less prepared for it than she might have wished. She was a companion. He was an earl, however dispossessed. She had 2 gowns and a small sum, and a position that a letter from London had just reminded her was precarious. He had a title and a mother's miniature, and 11 items of contested property, and no estate at all. She lay awake in the narrow bed in the companion's room at the back of the house, and considered all of this at some length, and arrived at the conclusion that she had developed a considerable talent for wanting things that were not available to her, and that the correct response was to finish the catalogue and do her work well, and go on as she had been going. This plan held until the following morning, when she came down to the library and found him already there, in the early gray light, reading. And he looked up when she entered and said, "Good morning, Miss Vane." And the warmth in it was not the warmth of courtesy. And she knew it, and she sat down and opened the catalogue and said nothing at all, which was exactly what she should have done. She should mention, however, that when she reached for the pen, their hands came quite close, his fingers at the inkwell, her wrist at the edge of the ledger, and neither of them moved for a moment that was too long to be accidental, and neither of them spoke, and the cold morning light lay across the table between them like a thing that was waiting. She moved her hand first. He returned to his reading. The moment passed. She was not the same as she had been before it. The solicitor's reply arrived on the 14th day, and it was not friendly. Pemberton's solicitor. Writing from Gray's Inn, with the crisp legality of a man who had examined the transfer documents and found them exactly as intended, confirmed that the 37 items bearing the Crestwood seal had been included in the general contents at the time of transfer. He noted that the inventory at transfer had not distinguished between estate contents and items of separate personal derivation, and that the transfer had therefore been legally complete as executed. He expressed his client's willingness to discuss the matter at a mutually convenient time, by which Cecily understood he meant never. She watched Lord Ashvale read it. He set it down on the table without expression. "That is the expected answer," he said. "It is not the correct one," she said. He looked at her. "The Crestwood seal predates the estate," she said. "The items bearing it were not acquired as part of the estate. They were brought to the marriage. That is a legal distinction, and any competent counsel would know it." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man who is considering whether to say something. "You know estate law," he said. "My father handled 3 estates in his living," she said. "I read his books after he died, because reading is inexpensive. I am not a solicitor. But I read carefully." Another silence. He was looking at her with that quality of attention again, the kind that felt like being seen properly in good light. And she was aware of the warmth that rose in her face, and was grateful for the gray morning. "If the items can be shown to have entered the estate as part of the Crestwood marriage settlement," he said slowly, "then they were never part of the transferable property." "Precisely," she said. "The marriage settlement documents should still be in the county records. If they list the items individually, the transfer is incomplete." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with the edge of something very much like warmth, "You catalogued the Crestwood seal deliberately." "Someone should have, before now," she said. Exactly as she had said it on the first day. He looked at her, the corner of his mouth, the warmth in his eyes. "Miss Vane," he said. She kept her hands flat on the table and her face composed, and waited. "My solicitor is in London," he said. "I will need to write to him immediately." He paused. "I would ask you to assist with the correspondence, but your employer has already been informed that your position here does not extend to secretary work." "Mrs. Hartwell," Cecily said carefully, "is in the morning room at this hour, which is on the other side of the house." She handed him the pen. He took it. Their fingers did not touch. He was very deliberate about that, she noticed, very precise, the way a man is deliberate when he is being careful about something that matters. "Thank you," he said, and there was everything in it. He wrote to his solicitor. He wrote to the county record office. He wrote a brief and exact letter to Pemberton's solicitor in London, citing the marriage settlement as the crux of the matter and requesting the production of any documentation that had been consulted at the time of transfer. The letters went out that same afternoon, and the house settled back to its quiet rhythms. And Cecily went back to the catalogue, and nothing appeared to have changed. Everything had changed. She knew it the next morning when she found he had left a book beside her chair. A volume from his coat pocket, the kind that goes with a person on a long journey. A collection of geographical essays about the Italian states, marked in a close, spare hand. She opened it to the first marked passage, and when he came in later with 2 cups of tea and set one beside her without comment, she looked up and said, "The passage about the olive terraces is the best thing in it." And he sat down across from her and said, "I thought so too." And they were quiet together in a way that felt like something being said. If you have ever been in a room with someone and known that something is being built between you that neither of you is quite willing to name yet, you will understand the quality of those mornings. The catalog grew. The correspondence produced its answers. The county record office located the marriage settlement documents, which listed 12 items by description that matched 12 of the 37 Crestwood sealed pieces in the inventory, and Lord Ashvale's solicitor wrote from London with a cautious optimism that was, from a solicitor, practically a celebration. It would take time. There would be more letters, more documentation, possibly a court filing. But the path was clear. Cecily told herself, in the evenings in her narrow room, that this was good. This was correct. He had a path forward, legal and actionable, and that was what mattered. She told herself this carefully and at some length. She was still telling herself this on the morning Mrs. Hartwell summoned her to the morning room and told her that Mr. Pemberton had arrived. Gerald Pemberton was a man of 50, well-dressed, with the particular air of someone accustomed to being the most consequential person in any room, and mildly surprised when this failed to be immediately apparent to others. He had arrived from London that morning without warning, which was his prerogative as owner of the property, and he was seated in the morning room when Cecily came in, with Mrs. Hartwell at one end of the settle and a young woman, perhaps 20, whom he introduced as Miss Lavinia Cartwright, his intended, at the other. Miss Cartwright was very beautiful and very composed, and had the specific quality of a young woman who has been told her whole life that she is the correct choice, and has come to believe it without malice. Pemberton looked at Cecily in the way men of his type looked at companions and governesses, which was to say briefly and with a categorization that was not unkind so much as absolute. "Mrs. Hartwell tells me Lord Ashvale has been assisting with your catalogue," he said. "Lord Ashvale has been reviewing the contents inventory," Cecily said. "I have been assisting him." Pemberton's eyes went to Mrs. Hartwell. A small communication passed between them. "Quite so," he said. "I had hoped to speak with him this morning. I have brought Miss Cartwright to see the house, as she will be its mistress next spring. We thought it best to view it before any significant changes are made to the library." There it was. Not a threat. Not exactly. A reminder. A statement of the hierarchy's arrangement, polite and complete. "I will tell Lord Ashvale you are here," Cecily said. She found him in the East Gallery, which she might have expected. He was standing before the portrait of his grandfather, the third from the left, the aquiline nose. He heard her step and turned before she spoke. She told him simply that Pemberton had arrived, that he had brought his intended, that the library had been mentioned. His face went through something she watched and would not have been able to describe afterward. Not defeat, something older and more specific. The expression of a man who has known all along that the thing he came for would cost more than the initial accounting, and is now paying the difference. "I see," he said. A pause. His gaze was on the portrait. Then it moved to her. "Miss Vane," he said. His voice was different, quieter. "I have something I should like to say to you, before I go down to meet him." Her heart moved in her chest in a way that she wished it would not. "Yes, my lord," she said. "In the 14 days since I arrived here," he said, "you have done several things that were not required of you. You called out to me at the gate, which was not required. You brought me the miniature, which was not required. You told me about the Crestwood seal and the marriage settlement, which was considerably beyond the requirements of any position. You have been, he paused, the most useful person in this house. And I have not said so clearly, and I should. She kept her face composed. You need not say so, she said. The work was the work. No, he said. He took a step closer to her, which was not many steps in the East Gallery, which was not a large room, and the light came from the high windows and fell across his face, and she was very aware of the distance between them, the particular controlled quality of it. It was not only that. And I think you know that it was not only that. She said nothing. I am aware, he said, of the precise nature of my circumstances. I have no estate. I have a title and a claim in process and a small income that is comfortable and nothing more. I am not in a position that warrants this conversation. I know that. A pause. But I have been watching you for 14 days, and you have been watching me, and I find I cannot go downstairs to meet Mr. Pemberton without saying one true thing first. Her hands were very still at her sides. I have been watching you, he said, because you are the most clear-sighted person I have encountered in 3 years, and because you looked at an inventory and saw what mattered in it, and because when you said someone should have noted it before now, I heard in that, for the first time in rather a long time, that someone cared that it had not been. His voice was level. His eyes were not. I cannot offer you anything yet. But I find I am unwilling to leave this room without you knowing that my attention has not been professional courtesy. The light moved on the floor between them. Nor has mine, she said. She said it quietly, to the middle distance, and then she looked up at him. As you well know. A long moment. Something crossed his face, the corner of his mouth, the warmth in his eyes that was deeper than she had seen it yet. I will go and meet Mr. Pemberton, he said. Yes, she said, and then I will write another letter to my solicitor. I have the reference papers ready, she said. Neither of them moved for a moment longer. Then he stepped back, straightened his coat, and went downstairs. She stood in the East Gallery alone for a little while, with the portraits and the high light and the tightness in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite joy, but something that partook of both. And then she went to the library and sat down at the reading table and opened the catalogue to where they had left off. She was there when he came back, 40 minutes later. He came in and sat down across from her and said nothing for a moment. And she looked up. Mr. Pemberton, he said, has offered to negotiate a repurchase. He has seen the marriage settlement documentation. He is aware the legal case is sound. A pause. He offered £9,500. The original transfer was $9,000. That is insulting, Cecily said. Considerably, he agreed. My solicitor believes we can do better through the court filing. Another pause. He has invited us both to dinner this evening. He wishes, I think, to understand the situation more fully. I am not relevant to the dinner, Cecily said. He looked at her steadily. You are, he said. If you are willing. She considered that. I have one gown suitable for dinner, she said. I know, he said. I have noticed it before. It is the blue one. He said it in the same level, careful way he said everything, and something in her chest went loose and warm in a way that was entirely outside her management. You look very well in it. She set down her pen. That is not the kind of thing, she said carefully, that is said in a professional capacity. No, he said. It is not. She was aware of her pulse at her wrists. "My lord," she said. "Elliot," he said. Then, after a brief pause, that same controlled corner of the mouth. "If you will permit it." She met his eyes across the reading table, across the catalog and the correspondence and the 14 days of work that had been, as he said, something other than only work. "Elliot," she said. The word felt like a door opened. He held her gaze for a long moment. "Cecily," he said, her name in his voice, a new thing in the world, solid and warm. Neither of them said anything else. There was no need. Dinner was not comfortable. Mr. Pemberton was attentive and polished, and the specific type of unsettling that comes from a man recalibrating the discovery that the present situation will not yield to his usual approach. Miss Cartwright was gracious and said very little. Mrs. Hartwell observed everything with her permanent mild apology. Cecily sat in the blue gown and ate with composure, and said very little, except when Pemberton addressed her directly, which he did twice, and both times she answered with brevity. And both times she felt Elliot's attention settle on the side of her face, like a hand that was not touching. After dinner, when the party had moved to the drawing room, Pemberton drew Elliot to one side near the window, and they spoke in low voices for several minutes. Cecily sat with Mrs. Hartwell and listened to nothing and watched the two men from the corner of her eye. She could not hear what was said. She could see Elliot's face in profile against the window, and she watched it and did not allow herself to interpret what she saw until they were done. The conversation ended. Elliot came across the room. He sat in the chair beside her in a movement that was deliberate and unhurried, and Pemberton did not follow, and Mrs. Hartwell found something to occupy herself at the far end of the room. "He has raised the offer," Elliot said in a low voice. "He would prefer not to go to court." "How much?" Cecily said. "Enough to matter." A pause. "Not full value. He will not pay full value. But with the salvage from the Continental account, it would be sufficient for the purchase back, if I chose to." "But," she said, "but a court filing would produce the full amount. Eventually. The timing is uncertain. And you prefer the certain thing." "I prefer," he said slowly, "to understand what I am doing and why before I decide. I have made one decision in recent years on insufficient understanding, and it cost me several years and this house. I do not intend to repeat the pattern." She looked at the fire. The room had settled to its quiet. Miss Cartwright was near the mantel, and the candlelight was soft on the plasterwork above the hearth, and it was Thornfield Park, exactly as she had come to know it, and she was aware of how much it meant to her that it continued to be what it was, and she was aware that this was a feeling she had no formal right to. "If you take his offer," she said carefully, "you have the house. You have certainty. You are in a position to proceed." She looked at her hands. "If you go to court, you have the better settlement, but the timing is unknown and the outcome is not fully controlled." "Yes," he said. "You already know what you will do," she said. "You are not asking me for counsel." A pause. "No," he said, "I am not." He looked at her. "I find I simply wish to say it aloud to someone who would understand it." Cecily felt the warmth of that settle through her, the specific, precise warmth of being understood rather than managed. "The offer," she said. "The offer," he agreed. He accepted Pemberton's terms the following morning. The papers were drawn up in the library, which Cecily found appropriate, and Pemberton's solicitor was sent for from London. And the matter was settled with the specific quiet efficiency of men who have decided that the legal path is less interesting than the practical one. Pemberton left Thornfield Park 2 days later. He took Miss Cartwright with him, back to London, and the Iron Gate was relabeled. and the name that went above it was the name it had held for 3 generations before the one that had sat there, sharp and wrong, since April. Mrs. Hartwell cried, a little, when she saw it. She wiped her eyes with a prompt efficiency that suggested she had not expected to cry and found it embarrassing, and Cecily pressed her hand and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not diminish it. 3 weeks after the papers were signed, Lord Ashvale called on Cecily in the morning room. He came in the afternoon, when Mrs. Hartwell was at her correspondence, and the light in the room was the pale, clear light of a November afternoon. Cecily was at the small desk near the window, writing a letter to her sister in Shropshire, and set down her pen when he came in. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at her, and she looked back. "I have spoken to Mrs. Hartwell," he said. She waited. "I have told her that my intention is to ask whether you would be willing to remain at Thornfield Park," he said. "Not in your current position. In a different one, if you are willing." The light lay still between them. "A different position," she said. "I am aware," he said, "that I am not yet what I was, and that what I was never extravagant. I have the house. I have the title. I have the small income and the continental salvage and the 37 items now properly attributed. I do not have a great deal else." A pause. "I have, however, been reliably informed by a solicitor that I am a fair enough prospect, and I believe myself to be a man who will work at what matters to him. I intend to work at this." She rose from her chair. "You are asking me to marry you," she said. "I am asking if you would consider it," he said. "I am aware it is not the offer another man might make. I am aware of what you are giving up, if you say yes." "A companion's position," she said. "Your independence," he said. "Such as it is. I have 2 gowns," she said. "I know." His voice was warm and dry and exact. "One of them is blue." She crossed the room. She crossed it in 3 steps, and he did not move. And she stopped close enough that she was looking up at him in the soft afternoon light. And there was the warmth of him, the particular quality of his stillness, the dark gray of his eyes that she had been looking at for a month now and intended to go on looking at. "Yes," she said. "I would consider it." "Consider it," he said. "Or accept it." "Accept it," she said. He took her hand. He held it, her bare hand in both of his, with the same precise carefulness he brought to everything that mattered, and looked at her face, and the thing she had seen in his eyes for a month now was not restrained or measured or held back. It was simply there, open and grave and warm. "Cecily," he said. Her name. Again. A thing already familiar, already worn smooth with use. "Elliot," she said. He lifted her hand and held it to his mouth. Not a kiss, but a breath, his lips at her knuckles, and she felt it through her whole body, the warmth and the weight of it, the recognition of a thing arrived at after it had been worked for. They were married in the parish church on the 20th of January, in the particular cold clarity of a morning that had threatened snow, and then decided against it. Mrs. Hartwell wept again, more freely this time, and did not apologize for it. The housekeeper and Hargreaves stood near the door in their Sunday clothes. Cecily's sister came from Shropshire and held her hands very tightly before the service, and called her Mrs. Ashford after, and seemed unable to stop. The wedding breakfast was held at Thornfield Park. Cecily stood in the drawing-room in a new gown she had made in the 3 weeks between the asking and the answering, pale cream with a dark ribbon at the waist, and she looked out through the terrace doors at the frost on the grounds and felt the grounded warmth of a woman who has come home to something she had not known was home until she arrived. Elliot came to stand beside her. He did not touch her in the crowd of people. He stood close, and she was aware of him as she was always aware of him, the warmth and the gravity, and he looked out at the frosted grounds alongside her. "The kitchen garden will need work in the spring," he said. "It will," she agreed. "I had thought," he said, "you might like to plan it." She looked at him. "I was born a clergyman's daughter," she said. "Not a gardener." "No," he said. "But you notice things." He looked at her. The warmth was unguarded in a way it had not been when she first saw him at the gate. The beautiful, precise restraint of it loosened just enough to show what was underneath. You notice what matters, and you write it down, and then you tell someone who is not noticed, and the world is clearer for it. She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "I would like to plan it." He looked back at the grounds. His shoulder was very close to hers. That evening, after the guests had gone and Mrs. Hartwell had retired and the house had settled to itself, Cecily sat at the writing desk in the library with the morning's letters and a fire burning low at the hearth. The miniature of his mother was on the mantelpiece now, where it belonged. The small oval face looking out at the room with the set of the mouth that she recognized. She had her pen. She had the correspondence. She had the fire and the November quiet, and the whole house gathered around her. The gallery with its portraits, the kitchen garden under its frost, the gate above the drive that bore the right name again. She heard his step in the hall. She did not look up. He came in and added a log to the fire without being asked, and then he sat in the chair beside her chair, the one that had become his chair in the way that things become claimed without declaration, and opened the book of Italian essays that she had returned to him and that he had returned to her, and that was now, she supposed, theirs. The fire settled. The November dark pressed close at the windows. The house was quiet around them. She went on writing. He went on reading. The miniature watched over them both from the mantelpiece, steady and small. A bright thing kept close through every loss. Finally at rest,